Welcome to Pop-O-Holics, the show about hot takes hotter than pancakes. You're tuning into our weekly upload for March 21st, 2022. My name is Chris Conkling, your host, and as always, I'm joined by one of my best friends,
Brian Dupree. How's it going, man?
Great. I'm pretty tired, but other than that, it's going great. How are you doing today, Brian?
I'm doing pretty well. Thankfully, slept decently, so I apologize.
I'm jealous.
I did get started a little late, a little behind the pod, so that's on me.
No worries. Have you been reading or watching anything cool this week?
You know, I actually finally got around to seeing Jackass Forever, which
Sick.
I know we talked about when it came out probably a month or so ago. And I haven't seen a Jackass movie in probably a decade. It's been about that long since I think the last one came out. And I mean, what can you say about Jackass movies? This is just good-natured ball smashing of all sorts.
The highest brow ball smashing you're ever going to find on the silver screen.
Just dudes being bros. We also have a woman who has joined the crew. We have some of the classic go-to actors, classic gang, as well as some new faces that is cool to see. Something that I didn't remember, and I don't know how much this was in the previous movies, not having seen them in so long, but Jeff Tremaine, the guy who's directed most, if not all of them.
All of them.
Okay, so he's directed all of them. He actually is kind of a character who they're very much like in correspondence with, and like during skits will be like, Jeff, come on, we got it, right? Like let me let the skit end, which I kind of forgotten, and is kind of this interesting behind the scenes thing that happens.
Yeah,
live.
I've heard from like Johnny Knoxville and Steve-O that he has a way of like coaxing them into doing certain things. He's very much capable of like manipulation and playing into their egos and like getting them to do stunts that they would either be hesitant to do or uncomfortable doing. And that's just kind of the way he's functioned with that Jackass crew since the beginning, which is great. I mean, he's one of their friends, you know, they all seem to be pretty tight. So
it's surprising given what transpires here and how they are constantly tricking each other and screwing each other over. But I have a quote. I know we sometimes talked about the kind of, conservative nature of Hollywood today and a lack of male nudity. This movie, as all the other ones have, completely turns that on its head, just excessive male nudity. There was a group
I wouldn't
of people,
expect anything less.
Of course. There was a group of older people, probably in their 60s or 70s, one of which was apologizing to another member of their party afterwards, who then said, well, we've got our dong consumption for the year. And this was just the perfect way to walk out of this movie.
Slap it on the DVD.
Honestly,
your dong consumption for the year. That is
you'll meet your
big
quota.
Selling point, you know, like taking your daily vitamins. You got to get your dong consumption in annually.
And I have.
Jackass Forever delivers.
Yeah. So, you know, this is not high class art by any stretch of the imagination, but I was laughing the entire time as well as cringing simultaneously.
And, you know, that's what is most important when going to see a Jackass film. You know, if you're laughing the entire time, I feel like the film has done its job. I've talked about on the podcast how viewing previous Jackass films, I always walk out of the theater and my cheeks hurt from laughing and smiling so much. So I'm happy to hear, I still haven't seen the movie. I still really want to see it, but I'm happy to hear that it was able to deliver on the comedy and that, you know, you got your annual dong consumption in. Good for you. Now you don't have to consume any more dong for the rest of the year.
Checking so many boxes at the theater this time. How about you? What have you been up to?
Well, I mentioned prior that I really wanted to watch Only Murders in the Building. You know, you've talked about it a lot here on this show, but I said that I was waiting for my wife to do so. And earlier in the week, I saw on our What's Up Next or Watch Next feed on our Apple TV that the first episode of Only Murders in the Building had been watched. And the next day I was like, did you watch this episode? So I made her go back, watch the first episode, and now we're binging the whole thing. I'm not going to spend too much time on that, though. You've talked about it and praised it a ton. The show is excellent. If you haven't seen Only Murders in the Building yet, you absolutely have to go watch it on Hulu. But as I mentioned, I'm tired. I'm a little sleep deprived. And what I've been doing is I've been rewatching Daredevil on Disney Plus. Disney Plus recently added all the Netflix Marvel shows to its platform. And, I watched the Daredevil show when it originally came out, starring Charlie Cox and a bunch of others. And I was a huge fan of it when it was on Netflix. But it's been a couple of years now, probably 3 years since I watched season 3. And dude, if you haven't seen Daredevil yet, a lot of people were excited for Charlie Cox to show up as Matt Murdock in Spider-Man No Way Home. But if you have yet to watch this show, the show is awesome. It is gritty and brutal. And this is like honestly the perfect Daredevil adaptation, in my opinion. And I would never want anybody other than Charlie Cox to play Matt Murdock or Daredevil. So I'm really happy that he's back in the MCU and Kevin Feige is bringing him back in. There's a rumor right now that it might get a reboot on Disney Plus, but that term's kind of loose. It might be like a 4th season, which I would prefer, I think. But yeah, watching a lot of Daredevil, watching a lot of Only Murders in the Building, highly recommend both. You haven't watched Daredevil yet, right?
This is a blind spot for me. No, I've seen a handful of action scenes from it that people showed me as must watches.
Oh, dude.
And they're
excellent
incredible.
Action choreography throughout.
Right.
Each season, I feel like they're trying to top themselves in terms of like what they can do. But it's truly awesome. I highly recommend it.
Yeah, I'll definitely be checking that out at some point, especially if they're going to bring back for a season 4.
Yeah. So, we've been talking about these shows, but I've neglected to say, what is Pop-O-Holics? Every week on Pop-O-Holics, on Mondays, we host our weekly upload, which you're watching right now, and we talk about pop culture like we just did with these 2 shows. We'll talk about movies and television and video games, sometimes comic books, but we basically break down what we've been consuming. We typically have a third with us, Christian Katie, but he's on paternity leave right now with his fiance and his baby boy. I'm going to leave it at that. It's up to him to talk about that. But we miss him dearly, and we're super happy for the 3 of them. But when it's 3 of us, we usually release 2 episodes a week. And the second episode airs on Wednesday typically, and it's usually themed around something in pop culture that's coming out. Every Thursday, we release a Throwback Thursday episode. Those are from our old catalog. So you can kind of get the feel of what our typical release schedule is like by listening to those episodes. But as of right now, because it's just Brian and I, we're trying to slim down the process, and we're only releasing the 1 weekly upload. But at the tail end of the weekly upload, we always talk about something that just got released. And this week, what are we talking about, Brian?
This week, we're talking about the latest Pixar movie on Disney Plus, Turning Red.
Yeah, and I'm very excited to do so. It's a really fun movie. But before we do that, we're going to deliver you guys some of the latest news in Hollywood and pop culture with Brian's Wacky News Corner.
Welcome back, everyone. So we've talked a good deal about this show as the casting and the show itself has been announced. But the first trailer for the new Disney Plus series, Miss Marvel, is out now. And I'll do the quick run through of the information for this. It's a mini series created by Bisha K. Ali, coming to Disney Plus, based on the Marvel Comics character Kamala Khan / Miss Marvel. It's going to be the 7th MCU show at this point, which they're cranking them out. That's wild.
Crazy considering that they started in 2020.
Yeah, I believe so, with WandaVision. Yeah.
Amazing.
So very just putting tons out these days. It's in the same continuity, obviously. Ali serves as the head writer with Adil El Arbi and Bilal Fallah, who is leading the directing team. And it stars Iman Vellani as Kamala Khan, as well as Aramis Knight, Sagar Sheikh, Reese Shah, and many more. I thought this trailer looked great. Honestly, it seems like a perspective that we haven't gotten in the MCU, which is wild considering how much MCU is out there now. Obviously, a teenage character who is coming of age story, very similar to Turning Red in a lot of ways, I imagine.
Very, yeah.
But what maybe is most interesting to me, and I doubt they'll dive too deeply into it, or I'm interested to see how deeply they dive. This is obviously the first Muslim character that we're going to have in the MCU. And MCU, while they have lowercase g gods, doesn't often deal with capital G God, especially in a monotheistic sense.
True.
So it's going to be interesting to see how they handle that sort of thing. and being Disney, I imagine they're not going to dive too deep or ruffle too many feathers with theological things. But yeah, that's one of the things that I'm kind of most interested to see how they handle in this show. I'm relatively unfamiliar with this character otherwise, but what did you think of this trailer?
You know, Marvel Studios constantly surprises me, Brian, in that they're able to take all these comic book properties and adapt them into so many various genres. You know, this trailer, like you said, was wholly unique from anything we've seen from Marvel Studios yet. And even though we've gotten another kind of like coming of age teenage story through Peter Parker, and the movies that John Watts directed in the Spider-Man trilogy very, very much seemed like a John Hughes type of films for the most parts. This feels different, and yet it's also a coming of age story. We're getting all these like fun pop-up graphics in the trailer. I don't know how much of those are going to be utilized in the show, but it looks like Kamala daydreams a lot, which I really like in the show, and we kind of get to see what she's thinking in her inner monologue and stuff, which is going to be a lot of fun. What I really like about the Kamala Khan character is that she is obsessed with comic books and the Avengers and superheroes, and she's essentially a fan of all this stuff. So I'm really interested to see how they adapt that to the MCU, this person who's grown up with the Avengers being a real thing in her world and wanting to be a hero herself and then discovering these powers. I'm just really intrigued by this show. And while I'm not, a teen girl, I still think there's a lot here that it's going to be really enjoyable. One of the most interesting things to note, I think, about this trailer is we finally got a glimpse of what her embiggening powers look like. And typically in the comic books, she has powers that look...
Is that what they call them?
Embiggening, yeah.
That's horrible. I'm sorry. Oh, that's bad.
She's a polymorph. They call her embiggening powers.
It did look really cool.
It looks really cool in the show. In the comics, it looks cool too, but she looks more like Reed Richards kind of when she pumps up her fist or something. There's like an elasticity to it. But here in the MCU, it looks like they're going with more like constructs, kind of like Green Lantern, which I kind of dig. But I think it works, man, and I'm really excited to see it. So, yeah, June 8th, Miss Marvel comes out on Disney Plus. We're getting Moon Knight on March 30th, which is like a 180 from what Miss Marvel's going to be. So I'm just really pleased to see that Marvel Studios has been able to keep up this tradition of essentially delivering a genre for everybody. You know, I think now, being so far into the MCU over 10 years, I honestly think there's some type of character and some type of film and some property that anybody can relate to within the MCU, which I think is really cool.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And looking forward to all of these shows. They really haven't put out anything particularly bad. So as Christian says, they're always hitting that Marvel bar. They always hit
that Marvel bar, right?
They very much do. So yeah, that's the first trailer for Miss Marvel that's out now. Check that out. All right. Coming to Brian and Chris shitting on the industries. We can't stop ourselves. We just can't stop ourselves. Amazon has closed an $8.5 billion deal to acquire MGM. So obviously an insane amount of money. In terms of MGM's film catalog, we have 12 Angry Men, Basic Instinct, Creed, Rocky, Legally Blonde, RoboCop, Silence of the Lambs, Poltergeist, Raging Bull, Stargate, Thelma and Louise, The Magnificent Seven, a ton of stuff, as well as the Bond series, which is a huge pickup in itself. Antitrust regulation, if it was ever a thing, is hard to remember at this point, unfortunately. The European Union's antitrust regulator unconditionally approved this purchase and is quoted as saying, MGM's content cannot be considered as must-have.
Sick burn.
Just absolutely ruthless, EU. My God. They also said they contend that the overlaps between the Amazon and MGM businesses are, quote, limited. Mm-hmm. Which, with the amount of shit that Amazon owns, I think they touch pretty much everything at this point. I will say that in terms of the United States, a bold move on Amazon's part. They kind of gave US regulators a date by which they could call us out or not. And it seems like they're going to push past that date. But with US law, they can put a stop to this at any point after that, even though it's gone through officially on their end. So it remains to be seen in the United States how this is going to play out. But all signs are pointing to this thing probably going through, unfortunately. And I say unfortunately, not because I don't use Amazon, but the further monopolizing of industries just is inevitably going to push out creative talent and make things more monolithic. We're big fans of Disney and MCU content here, but they are a big part of this as well, buying up Fox, buying up all of this IP and becoming the only player in town. So it's just a bit unfortunate. And these companies have so much money that MGM, with the state of movies right now, it's probably the best option for them in terms of financially and their stockholders and things like this. How do you feel about this news, Chris? Are you hopeful that U.S. regulators will knock this thing down?
I'm not hopeful that will be the case. I think that the deal is definitely going to go through. But Brian, it's such an interesting time to be a fan of film and watch all these kind of tech and retail behemoths absorb all these studios that just can't keep themselves afloat anymore. MGM is almost a century old. When I think of classic movies, when I think of cinema, MGM comes to mind. And it just blows my mind that the number of people that are getting their hands on the things that we view in theaters and on streaming is becoming smaller and smaller and smaller, which, like you said, could potentially, I'm not gonna say that it definitely will, because I don't want to be that much of a pessimist, which I have the habit of being sometimes, but it could potentially mean that we get fewer diversity in storytelling, and possibly a lack of quality in storytelling because of the lack of diversity. But it's mind-blowing. I like this company that started off as an online bookstore now owns MGM.
It's insane. MGM, more than 4,000 film titles, 17,000 TV episodes, 180 Academy Awards, and 100 Emmy Awards. Now could just be straight to streaming content.
Well, the good news is that you and I have watched several releases that have come out on Amazon Prime over the last couple of years. And a lot of those releases very fairly have gotten limited theatrical releases as well. So sure. I don't want to say that Amazon doesn't care about the exhibitor experience or anything like that. I mean, obviously, I think more than anything, they probably want their films to be eligible for Academy Awards, and that's probably why they end up doing the limited releases. Right. But I'm still happy that they're doing them. The day that they stop and everything just becomes streaming will be a sad day, but I don't think that day is today. I still think they're probably going to continue with this trend of releasing some of their more Oscar-worthy pictures to exhibitors before they bring them solely to streaming. But I pay for Amazon Prime. I'm sure you pay for Amazon Prime. Like, it's crazy to think what a value Amazon Prime is at this point, because initially I signed up for it as a college student to get discounts on college books, to get free shipping, and now you can listen to music, you can watch movies, you can watch television shows. Like, there's so many avenues. Free
ebooks relatively often.
It's pretty crazy. So I'm not surprised that Amazon went out and purchased MGM. Apple has also been trying to consume huge studio catalogs recently. You have Disney buying Fox and consolidating those catalogs. It's just everybody is in the content consumption game right now and trying to acquire the biggest library possible for their streaming service. And while it makes me a little anxious about the future, there's nothing we can do to stop it. But fingers crossed.
I think we call that
downer.
Moloch. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly. This is terrible Metropolis references. Film nerds, shout out. Thankfully, we can be thankful that when Amazon buys AMC, they won't have to change the acronym. So
oh my gosh.
look forward to that. All right. So moving on from that great news, Nicolas Cage. He has not seen the Batman, although he claims he wants to see the Batman. Everyone else
step in the right direction, I guess.
It is a step in the right direction. He's a fan of Pattinson, thinks he's going to do well. But he made a shout out to Warner Brothers executives that, quote, the villain that Vincent Price played on the 1960s show, Egghead. I think I want to have a go at Egghead. I think I can make him absolutely terrifying. And I have a concept for Egghead. So let them know over at Warner Brothers, I'm down for Egghead. Nicolas Cage is down for Egghead. He wants to be in Matt Reeves' sequel to the Batman, if this is something that is going to come. We know that there are 2 series in the works right now, one focused around Arkham, which is going to be kind of a horror series of sorts, as well as a Penguin series starring Colin Farrell. So it's possible that, given how well this movie is doing right now, I think it's crossed 500 million globally at this point, if it had, or it's close to, if it hasn't already. The Batman will probably get a sequel. Egghead is a character that I'm relatively unfamiliar with, but according to this article from Variety, the bald-headed Egghead is a master criminal and one of the smartest people in the world. Nic Cage seems to have a take on him. Vincent Price played him back in the 60s. Chris, how do you feel about Nicolas Cage potentially entering into the DC universe and playing this character Egghead, who I had never heard of prior to this?
It's an incredibly weird but incredibly Nicolas Cage choice to make.
Yes.
You know, Egghead's a character that was solely developed for the 1966 Adam West Batman, and therefore is very suited to that style of Batman storytelling. You know, he's a really goofy bald guy, wears a bow tie, a lot of egg puns. You know, it's super silly, but in line with what was happening in the 60s with Batman and Robin. Does Egghead have a place in Matt Reeves' new The Batman universe? I don't see that at all. But I was, as you were mentioning the projects that WB is working on for HBO Max, you know, the Penguin story and the Arkham show, which we don't know a whole lot about. But if it turned out that the Arkham show ended up being some type of like anthology series where they covered a different villain in Arkham every episode, I would be 100% down to see Nicolas Cage play a version of Egghead in that show. I don't think he is a big enough villain to be in a movie with Robert Pattinson, but I think it would make for a really interesting episode if it turns out that, you know, Arkham is something in line with that. And I'm just speculating here. I have no idea what that show is going to be, especially considering that I think it pretty much like ate the GCPD show that was supposed to come out. We were supposed to get a Gotham Central show, and
Arkham was originally going to be that.
It transferred into that. So I'm not quite sure what that show is going to be, but sure, if Nicolas Cage is willing to do something for HBO Max and he wants to do Egghead, I'm down to see that performance. I think it would be a really weird fucking performance and very entertaining, but I just don't see that character being big enough to be the lead villain in a Batman movie. Maybe he could be like the villain that the movie opens with that the Batman captures and takes to Arkham. You could do that, like a quick cameo. They've done that before in the past. But good on Nicolas Cage for putting that out there into the universe. We'll see what comes of it.
And we're going to be talking about Nicolas Cage a good deal more.
A whole month's worth.
A whole month's worth surrounding his latest movie, The Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent, which right now seems to be one of his best performing movies critically ever.
You know, my wife and I've probably seen that trailer like 10 times at this point, but we saw the newest trailer when we went to go see The Batman. And I turned to my wife.
It's a great trailer.
I turned to my wife and I said, is this going to be the best movie ever made? I cannot wait to see that movie.
It looks so good, especially if you're a fan of Nicolas Cage.
Right. Which I, to be honest, am not. My wife's the fan of Nicolas Cage, but I can't pass up Pedro Pascal and Nicolas Cage acting against one another. It looks to be so much fun. So yeah, look forward, loyal listeners and viewers, to Nicolas Mage, as Brian has coined the month. May, we're going to be doing all Nicolas Cage all month. So that'll be fun.
Definitely excited for that. So Let's move into some stuff that's coming out this week. Very TV heavy. As we've talked about, the Batman has kind of pushed out everything around it, and there isn't all that much releasing in theaters these days. But the first show we're going to talk about is Parallels. That'll be coming to Disney Plus on Wednesday. This is a French science fiction mystery show that is created by Quoc Dong Tran. I apologize for all my pronunciations here. Written by Tran as well as Anastasia Heinzel, and starring Thomas Chommel, Omar Mabrouk, Jules Huplain, and Jade Pedri, and follows 4 childhood friends, Sam, Bilal, Romain, and Victor, who are leading a calm existence in a peaceful village in the mountains when a mysterious event turns their worlds upside down. In a split second, the universe discards its rules and reshuffles everything. The present, future, and multiverses merge, separating the teens and sending them into parallel worlds. We're very much in a multiverse mindset in pop culture these days. There are many things tackling these sorts of topics. This actually reminded me kind of this highly improvised small budget indie called Coherence, which stars adults and is probably available streaming somewhere. Really, really great movie if you haven't seen it. This one's definitely geared towards kids. It's a children's show, French as well, I was not expecting it to be. I should have known, since it's coming to Disney Plus in the US, that there would have been dubs, but very obvious dubs happening here, even though it was originally in French. Chris, we've seen a bunch of shows and movies like this, especially in the MCU. What did you think of this trailer?
I have to agree with you that Hollywood is definitely on a multiverse kick right now, even outside of the comic book genre. It looks interesting. You know, that's really all I can say about it. I don't know a whole lot about it other than the trailer, but interesting concepts of people shifting through time and dimension, and, you know, them having to figure out why this is transpiring. So it looks interesting.
Got some decent like mystery concepts going, maybe some time jumps. There's going to be multiple people playing characters. I'll just leave it at that without any particular spoilers. But yeah, that's coming to Disney Plus this Wednesday. Moving on, a show that is a severe miss for me. I've seen 3 or 4 episodes of the first season. It's been on almost a 4-year hiatus at this point, but Atlanta season 3 is coming back to FX this Thursday. This is created by and stars Donald Glover, as well as Brian Tyree Henry, Lakeith Stanfield, and Zazie Beetz. Incredible cast. It follows Ern during his daily life in Atlanta, Georgia, as he tries to redeem himself in the eyes of his ex-girlfriend, Van, who is also the mother of his daughter, Lottie, as well as his parents and his cousin, Alfred, who raps under the stage name Paperboy, and Darius, Alfred's eccentric right-hand man. This series follows them on tour in Europe. So it's going to be a outside of America, outside of Atlanta series. I think it has already been greenlit for 4th season. I'll say that. I don't know if some people thought the hiatus meant this show was never coming back, but
which is going to be its last season.
Okay, I actually didn't realize that. But a big lapse here. Obviously, COVID probably delayed things even further. But with everything I've heard about this show, it's something that I've been meaning to watch forever and need to catch up prior to this season completing and coming out, especially knowing that it's got a set end date. Everything I've heard has been great about this. Have you seen any of this show, any of the first 2 seasons?
Brian, I love this show. In fact, I think Atlanta is probably some of the best television that's come out over the course of the last decade. So If you're sleeping on Atlanta, you need to get on it right now. It's so good. Donald Glover does such a great job. It goes on these really interesting and quirky tangents. Lakeith Stanfield is fantastic in the show, as well as Brian Tyree Henry and Zazie Beetz and Donald Glover, of course. Everybody is just fantastic on the show. But I'm so excited that it's finally coming back to FX. And I'm ready to see what this cast of characters does while touring around Europe. I think it's going to be a lot of fun.
Yes, that's Atlanta. We don't often talk about cable, but that'll be showing on FX on the 24th, and I imagine
usually it's also on Hulu.
Mm-hmm. Okay, maybe a day later or so, day or 2 later. So yeah, that'll be out this Thursday. Something that's also coming out this Thursday to Paramount Plus is the new Halo series. So this thing has been in development for nearly a decade. It was originally going to be a movie with multiple directors who had circled around that, eventually started being developed into a TV show. This one is developed by Kyle Killen and Stephen Kane. We talked about the trailer that had come out for this a few weeks ago. It follows a 26th century war between the United Nations Space Command and the Covenant, a theocratic military alliance of several advanced alien races. I played one Halo game for the full course of it, and it was probably over a decade ago, probably 15 years ago since I played the game. I think on the original Xbox, my cousin's original Xbox, who was woefully underused by him for this game. And I was like, I'll come over and play this game for you. I will say the trailer looks pretty good. I'm not sure how much the lore of this is really interesting to dive into, but pretty solid trailer. Going to be on Paramount Plus, which I know is not the most accessible. I don't have an account for that right now. But what do you think about this, Chris? What's your history with Halo? And I know we've talked about it relatively recently, but are you planning on trying to check the show out?
Yeah, as I mentioned, I think this is going to be the first show that gets me to sign up for Paramount Plus. This in the
That's
offer
right.
coming out later this year. The first trailer just looked like great sci-fi, Brian. And I'm not a fan of the Halo franchise. I've only owned the first generation Xbox, but I didn't really use it a whole lot. I've never played a Halo game in its entirety ever. I've only played multiplayer with friends at their own houses, but I'm thoroughly interested in checking this show out. And isn't Steven Spielberg an executive producer on the show as well?
He is, yeah.
So, the show already got renewed for season 2. I don't know if there was something in the deal that required a 2-season order or something from the start, but typically when you get renewed for a season 2 prior to even being released, it means there's something special taking place. So I'm incredibly interested to check out Halo, regardless of the fact that I know very little about the actual lore. I'm excited to learn more about the lore of Halo through the show itself. So it looks
Awesome.
really cool.
Yeah, so that'll be coming to Paramount Plus this Thursday. We also have Pachinko. It's coming to Apple TV Plus this Friday. So the summary of this show: the hopes and dreams of 4 generations of a Korean immigrant family, beginning with a story of a forbidden romance that leads to a sweeping saga taking place in Korea, Japan, and America. So this is not a time travel multiverse show, but it feels very similar to that sort of show in its scope, going between multiple generations over courses of time. I'm not sure if there's going to be like a romantic kind of potential past, potential future thing that they're playing with here. The trailer is a bit open-ended in terms of it because it is beautifully shot and looks like they could deal with some of that stuff. But this is based on the novel of the same name by Min Jin Lee. It's created by Soo Hugh and stars Yoon Jung, who was incredido in Minari, and was nominated for an Academy Award and won for her performance as the grandmother in that, and also stars Lee Min Ho, Jin Ha, and Kim Mina. So that'll be out on Apple TV Plus this Friday, and according to the trailer, it looks pretty good. And this one does not seem to be dubbed in such a way as the Disney Plus
As
one.
parallels.
So this one, it will be in Korean. So I know we've talked a lot of trash about the Oscars, but
Fuck it, Brian, get it out of here.
I can't say that I'm not going to be tuning in for the 94th Academy Awards presented by the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences, which is going to be happening at the Dolby Theater in Hollywood this Sunday, March 27th. We've talked too much about it already. If you're a fan of the Oscars, I'm sure you knew it was coming, but I'll probably talk briefly about it next week. Assuming
We'll definitely talk about the winners. Absolutely. We always talk about the winners. So
we'll talk about it a bit either way next week and see how people are thinking about it, how people are talking about it. I'm sure the criticisms will be rampant, especially on Twitter. But yeah, the 94th Annual Academy Awards. It'll be coming to ABC this Sunday. The only movie that's coming out in theaters this week that, as far as I can tell, and it actually, looking at dates, it may have some limited release even before the eventual Thursday, Friday actual release date, but we have The Lost City. So this is a romantic adventure comedy directed by Adam Nee and Aaron Nee. both of whom co-wrote the screenplay with Oren Uziel and Dana Fox, from a story conceived by Seth Gordon. Many, many hands in the pot here, as they say, which isn't always the best sign, but not necessarily a death knell either. This stars Sandra Bullock and Channing Tatum, which, come on, these are a couple of people who are easy to watch, charisma to spare. Also stars Daniel Radcliffe, Davine Joy Randolph, and Brad Pitt in supporting roles. The premise of this: Loretta Sage is a dissatisfied middle-aged author who writes romance adventure novels centered around a fictional hero named Dash, who is portrayed by dim-witted cover model Alan Caprison. While on tour with Alan to promote her new book, Loretta is kidnapped by Abigail Fairfax, an eccentric billionaire who believes that the lost city in Loretta's new book is real and that she knows where it is. This movie seems like it could have been Uncharted, or something that was like very similar to Uncharted if that movie was not based on existing IP. I've seen the trailer for this once. It looks pretty much what you'd expect from this sort of movie. Not something that I'm going to be racing out to see personally, but aside from the Batman, it's one of the only new things in theaters right now. So The Lost City will be out this Friday.
This is going to be one of those, what are the critics saying about this movie, to decide whether or not this is something I spend my money on in theaters?
Wouldn't hold your breath on that front, Chris, but we'll see. Maybe we'll be pleasantly surprised with this one. But yeah,
I don't know. To be honest, a great example of a movie just like totally shocking my expectations is Free Guy. I didn't think that movie was going to be good at all. And that was like one of the most beloved movies of last year. So
a movie that you still haven't watched, though.
And I still haven't watched it.
What's going on with this?
I need to figure out if I'm going to watch Free Guy or The Adam Project first. We'll see what happens.
Shoot, that's a good point. Something that we can maybe discuss over our break. But that's actually it for the news this week.
Thanks, Brian. Wacky as usual. I appreciate it. We're going to move right on into the Pop-O-Holics community feedback section now. Welcome back to the Pop-O-Holics community feedback section, loyal viewers and listeners. Here in the community feedback section, we take care of some housekeeping for the Pop-O-Holics. We always talk about our Throwback Thursday episode coming out on our YouTube channel. We go over poll results if we have any. This week we don't. And then if you leave us a 5-star review and write a review on either Spotify or Apple Podcast app, we will read it here in this section. We don't have any to read this week, but we do have a Throwback Thursday episode coming out. Right now, we are re-releasing our November 2019 episodes. And in November of 2019, we had kind of like a food motif going for the Pop-O-Holics. You know, here in America, it is, that Thanksgiving season. It's a time to be with family. It's a time to think about good food. So that's kind of where that motif is coming from. Last week, we talked about Chef, the 2014 Jon Favreau film. And then this week on our Throwback Thursday episode, we are going to be having a discussion about Jiro Dreams of Sushi, a really excellent documentary about this master artisan sushi maker. There were several moments within the documentary that really hit me hard. I had a lot of fun with this documentary. Brian, do you have anything you want to add about Jiro Dreams of Sushi?
I will never forget the softness and subtle firmness of the way that this man taps the sushi as he makes it. This thing is, even if you're not a fan of documentaries, this has so much to offer. The food looks incredible. There's great stuff about being a parent and passing legacy down through your family. It's just incredibly beautiful. And I'm not a big foodie in terms of high class levels of food, but this kind of showed me what Michelin star ratings truly mean and how there is real merit and obvious reasons why these things have the level and the status that they do.
Absolutely. A life dedicated to one specific craft. It's truly amazing. I wish I had dedication like that. But that's Jiro Dreams of Sushi. Head on over to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Pop-O-Holics on Thursday to check out our conversation from 2019 about the documentary. And if you're already here watching us on YouTube, then please subscribe, like this video. We release content.
Smash that like button.
Smash the like button. Click that bell icon so you don't miss when we release videos every week. We do it on a weekly basis, but we would hugely appreciate it if you would do all those things. And with that, Brian, we are going to close out the first half of the show. But when we come back from our break, we're going to be talking about the new Pixar film released straight to Disney Plus, Turning Red.
Let's go. I'm Maylin Lee. I wear what I want, say what I want, 24/7, 365. I know, it's a lot. But I don't got time to mess around. All about that hustle, am I right? Poor town. This is gonna be the best year ever. And nothing's gonna get in my way. All right.
May, breakfast is ready.
Coming.
It's gonna be me.
That was from the trailer of Turning Red, the new Pixar film streaming on Disney Plus. Directed by Domi Shi, written by Domi Shi and Julia Cho, score by Ludwig Göransson. He's doing a lot of great work. Doing a lot of great work.
Yeah.
And of course, starring Rosalie Chang as Mei Lin and Sandra Oh as Ming Li and many others. We're going to talk about, as usual, our non-spoiler thoughts of the film. Then we'll go into spoilers, talk about some of the standout moments of the film. This movie has had a lot of controversy behind it in the Twitter space, especially if you follow film Twitter. I'm sure you've seen a lot about this movie. A lot of which I think is unjustified, and I think we might get into it a little bit during the course of the episode. But Brian and I both watched this movie over the course of the week. Brian, I'm very interested to hear your thoughts because we haven't really talked about it much in our personal chat. What are your non-spoiler thoughts of Turning Red?
As usual with Pixar, this movie was an absolute delight. The animation is incredible. They're constantly pushing forward, and with this, they do something interesting while still having the essential Pixar feel. They bring some kind of anime elements into it, that a little bit of like surrealism that definitely ties in with what they're going for, and the nature of being a teenager and caught up in all these heavy emotions, which definitely works. I think it's hilarious from front to back until I'm just sobbing uncontrollably at some point. I was joking beforehand. My neighbors probably were worried for me last night while I was watching this movie because it was bad at some point. We'll get into it with spoilers. All the performances are great. Rosalie Chang as Mei just really carries this thing and makes the whole movie work. Sandra Oh as Ming Li, as well as all of the friends. Everyone really is doing dynamic stuff and just has such character to them through the voice acting. I don't know how to talk about voice acting well, but everyone has very distinct personalities and voices that are expressed well through their characterizations, I think. The main metaphor is obviously puberty, for those of you who don't know about this, but there's really so much more there with how relationships can sustain you or hold you back, or factions of both of those, how everyone changes over time, and you have to make a decision whether to embrace that change or push back against it. And also just relationships with parents and how difficult it can be to simultaneously want the love and respect that you've grown up with while also becoming your own person, and what that means to show them your true self as it's developing over time, and maybe someone different than they've known throughout the course of the rest of your life. Even when the parents, in this case, particularly the mother, can be unbearably embarrassing at times, just so cringy and uncomfortable. It's really, really rough at times. I think most of the pushback that you kind of referred to seems to me to be a bit of bad faith misreading of the movie by, I won't say it's all by conservative Christians, but it does seem to be like PG means parental guidance. The movie has, as they say, suggestive themes and things like this, where it's like movies are rated for a reason. If it's a PG movie and you're worried about showing it to your kids, watch it beforehand, you know? And we talked about the Don't Say Gay bill recently, and a lot of people are uncomfortable with the realities of children growing up and going through adolescence and puberty. And this movie is definitely a metaphor to
which is shocking because it's an unstoppable inevitability of human existence. So I personally don't really understand that, but continue, Brian.
And a lot of people don't know how to talk to their kids about it. And as someone who's not a parent, I got to imagine it's not easy to discuss growing up and these things that are natural and happen to everyone over the course of time. But if you're worried about it, just watch it beforehand. That's the point of these ratings, you know? And I made a joke in our group chat that PG, back in 1984 with Ghostbusters, there were explicit sexual innuendos of sex acts that happened in PG movies back in the day. So how far we've come that now a PG movie can't even reference, they never even say period throughout the course of this movie. It's all just implied. So we'll get into some other stuff because I do think if you are, and I feel like this is a misread of the movie, but if you are reading it explicitly, literally, the second act and where things go, I get why people, if they're reading it this way, could have a little bit of pushback in it. But we'll get into that as we get into spoilers. Pixar hardly ever misses for me, and they did do it again here. I thought Turning Red was great and ridiculously emotionally effective, more than I was thinking it was going to be, personally.
Brian, you and I feel very similarly about this movie. I'm only now realizing that I didn't even read the summary of this movie. So before I give my opinions of the film, here's a quick summary. A 13-year-old girl named Mei Lin turns into a giant red panda whenever she gets too excited. Simple as that. Brian, this movie was adorable. I fucking loved this movie. And I don't know if that's because I myself was 13 and 14 in 2002, my wife as well. We were May's age in this era. Now, yeah, we were living here in the United States and we weren't living in Canada, and neither of us are Chinese as well. But this movie was incredibly relatable, to say the least. And literally from the first moment that May is on screen, I turned to my wife and I was like, I love this character. She's so confident and quirky and just totally adorable. I went to school and had friends that were like this in high school. I like people that are like May, who are confident in themselves and know what they're good at and know what they like. And what I really love about this movie is, like you said, the whole her turning into a giant red panda is an allegory for puberty and adolescence and growing up. And those are tumultuous times for teenagers, for tweens, because, and as it's illustrated in the movie, you think you're one thing, and then all of a sudden everything is flipped on its head. You're trying to discover who you are. You're trying to figure out what you want to hang on to and what you want to let go of. It's a very challenging time for people, but everybody goes through it. And that's why I felt like this movie was so incredibly relatable, and it was shocking. I don't know why I was so shocked. I think it's incredibly naive of me to be so shocked that not everyone can relate to this particular movie, considering, like I said, puberty is something that everybody has to experience. Nobody avoids this. So yeah, I think the allegory in the movie was incredibly charming and important and relatable. And I love Pixar movies for that reason. They never shy away from tackling more challenging concepts in their films, like death and now adolescence. And I think that's important. I don't like children's movies that tend to talk down to the audience. We should always be trying to lift up the youth of the world, So yeah, besides that, the aesthetic of this film is right up my alley. As we've talked about on the podcast before, I'm a big fan of anime. I grew up in the United States, or in the West, when there was a giant anime boom and it was first coming to the West. So Domi Shi, being my age, also clearly has a huge love for Ghibli and Sailor Moon and anime in general, because there's so much of that just baked into the aesthetic of Turning Red and how characters move and react to things. We get like giant sparkly anime eyes from characters. It's just a ton of fun. The facial aesthetic of the movie isn't identical, but there are moments where it did really remind me of Ghibli, especially like My Neighbors, the Yamadas. Like I said, it's not identical, but like the round features, and there are very few sharp edges and stuff. It just, Brian?
There's a couple of crying scenes that very much felt like some of the iconic scenes in like Spirited Away and things like that.
Absolutely.
In style, for sure.
The giant red panda that May turns into definitely is it takes inspiration from like Totoro, from My Neighbor Totoro. So there are just a lot of fun Japanese elements within the movie that or anime elements that I really appreciate. And yeah, this was a home run film for me. My wife absolutely loved it as well. Both of us were tearing up by the end of the movie. She was a huge fan of NSYNC when we were growing up.
Who wasn't
in the 90s? I will admit that the first concert that I ever went to, I think it was in 5th grade, was an NSYNC concert.
Okay.
So even me was a fan of I was a fan of NSYNC when they were at their peak. So there's just a ton to relate to here in this character, regardless of gender and age and ethnicity. So that's why it was so frustrating to open up Twitter and go, not everybody feels this way. But yeah, it's a huge recommend for me. I think it's also a huge recommend from Brian. Do you have anything else you want to add in our non-spoiler section before we dive into some of our favorite moments of the film, or get a little more specific with some of the points that we brought up?
No, I think that's good. Like you said, definitely. I mean, it's Pixar. They're hitting all of the emotional beats. It's a human story, even though it's fantastical.
And Brian, you mentioned this is Pixar. This is their 25th film. And that being said, it's kind of disheartening that it moved straight to Disney Plus. It does make me sad that this is this should be something celebratory. They've made a quarter of 100 films, and like it's just right to a streaming service. And I know Soul went right to a streaming service. I know Onward, because of the pandemic, was only in theaters for a brief window. But it just makes me sad that it seems like the last couple of Pixar films haven't really gotten the respect that they deserve. And if I'm being frank, and this might sound blasphemous to a lot of Pixar fans, I think I would put Turning Red in like my top 5 favorite Pixar movies of all time. To be honest, that's just how much I enjoyed the movie. But I'm sure that's probably a very unpopular opinion.
I don't know. But the thing is, to your point about it not being in theaters, it seems like it would maybe be kind of a small movie, but it's surprising how there are like kind of action set pieces in this movie to some degree. And definitely the third act has some big moments that I'm sure, I mean, the animation itself would look incredible, but those moments would be really best experienced on a big screen with an incredible sound system. So I'm totally in agreement. It's a shame. I would have loved to be able to see this in a theater.
Same. So with that being said, we're going to dive into spoilers here. Brian, do you want to go into anything that you mentioned in our non-spoiler section in more detail, or do you have any standout moments from the film that you want to touch on?
Yeah, I'll start with some standout moments, and then let you do your standouts, and we'll get into some of the controversy a little bit maybe. Early on, you mentioned I was a big fan of NSYNC, Backstreet Boys. I grew up in this era of music, so how could you not? And in the very beginning, we get May describing all of the members of Four Town, and the first 3 all have like very specific talents that they're known for.
And then the last 2,
and the second 2 are like, and they're really talented too.
Right. And then there's those guys.
And this is just so classic boy band, where you have your favorites, you have the ones who have kind of risen to the forefront. And then you have the other ones who are just kind of there.
The other guys, yeah.
I related to that so much growing up in this era, and it felt very real to me.
The gag that comes up a couple times in the movie, why are they called Four Town if there's 5 of them?
So good. And it works perfectly with the 4 friends being, definitely fits in.
Exactly.
There's a very short scene where her father is cooking, and the way that Pixar has come to animate food.
Oh my gosh.
It's just nearly photo real, but still that animated sheen, and it just looks incredible. And I don't think we brought it up, but it's funny because I had mentioned it in our chef episode that I was listening to that we put up last week on our Throwback Thursday, when I had recently seen The Incredibles 2 and Domi Shi's short that was in front of that bow, which another heartbreaking piece of cinema.
Oscar-winning animated short, Bao.
Completely deservedly. Unbelievable. And
you can also tell, if we look at Bao and we look at Turning Red, a lot of similar themes taking place between the short and the film in terms of parent-child relationships. So Domi Shi's definitely, working something out with these 2 projects.
And that it's a very quick scene. It's probably only 30 seconds, but really stunning animation. One of the best animated moments in the movie, I think, for me. Do you mind if I mention one more thing? I talked about how the film reminds me a lot of Ghibli, and Studio Ghibli is known for having some of the best animated food prep and cooking scenes in the industry. So it's interesting that you bring up that Pixar is really kind of hitting a peak here in terms of food animation, because I think they're definitely following in the footsteps of Studio Ghibli without a doubt. And it brings such texture to the world, right? It's like, I don't know, it puts you there in such an interesting way. And just seeing the other members of the family watching TV, watching these cheesy soap operas, it's just, it's a family. It's such an interesting entry point.
Feels very true to life.
Everyone can relate to. Yeah. Very silly moment that it's both like a callback, but also kind of like, I don't know how exactly to say it, but there's a moment where after she's become the panda and, starting to see boys differently than she did before, she sees the clerk again, who she wasn't that into before. And she has the classic, tropey awooga and is slapping her leg. And I was like, my
it's
God.
Great, cartoon wolf type of inappropriate reaction. Yeah.
Exactly. It felt like such a throwback to this time that we think of as almost like overly sexualized cartoons kind of things. And it felt just very it's a fun throwback to that, but not, in a problematic way. I don't know. That just really, having not seen cartoons like that in a really long time, it brought me back to my childhood in a very quick, nostalgic way.
I also think that moment, there are many moments throughout this film that are, I want to say that they're pleasantly awkward. My wife and I really enjoyed kind of living in the awkwardness of a lot of what this movie presents to the audience, because like I said, it is so true to life and it is so relatable. And so many people can say I've gone through situations that, while not identical, are similar to what May is going through in this film. So I really did enjoy living in this awkward space for the almost 2-hour runtime of this film. And that moment that you're talking about when she's outside the window of the convenience store and it's basically catcalling the clerk. And it's so brief, and it kind of within her is this one moment where this feeling kind of explodes out of her and she just leans into it, right? And that's so representative of what puberty is, these flash of emotions. You're becoming attracted to people in a sexual way. And it's just, I don't know, like I said, true to life or authentic is kind of the best way I can describe what this movie's presenting to people. And that's why I found it to be so great. But other people were like, no, I will not talk about puberty. I will not hear about being sexually attracted to people. It's ridiculous to me. Anyway, sorry, Brian, continue.
No, and it's okay. And it's funny because, she starts drawing what she calls sexy photos. And it's very much almost it's basically imagining men as mermaids. It's
this, anime dudes as mermaids.
Exactly,
or
right.
Anime versions of the people in her neighborhood as mermaids.
Yeah, exactly. So very, I totally agree with what you're saying.
It rides the line of like, because at that age you don't know what you're doing, like all these feelings are new, so it rides the line of like innocence and adulthood simultaneously, and I just found that to be so charming. I don't know. Right,
it's like she's basically drawing being held by the guy that she's just like literally an embrace, and her mother freaks out about it, of course, and it's implied that there are other photos that we're not seeing, but we see some of them later in the movie. But yeah, obviously nothing explicitly sexual by any stretch. Some of the really sweet moments, like when her friends find out and see her as a panda for the first time, and they all start beatboxing and singing one of their songs. I was nearly tearing up at this moment. I was like, my God, what awesome friends these are. It's like, these are the sorts of friends that everyone wants to have, that even at a moment where you feel at your worst, they still love you, and they still relate to you on this basic level. It's like, we all love Four Town. Like, you're still our girl. Like, don't worry about it.
Regardless of whether you're a giant fluffy red panda.
Yes, exactly. I have a few more moments, but I want to let you take some so I don't steal all the best ones.
We've talked a lot about how this film is obviously an allegory for puberty and adolescence, but one of the other themes of this movie is acceptance. Learning to accept yourself for who you are. Really lean into your quirks, and your talents, and love yourself, to be honest. And one of my favorite scenes in the movie comes much later in the film. We don't get a lot from the dad character that you mentioned earlier. And there's this wonderful moment where he finds a VHS recording of her just kind of being herself and hanging out with her friends and being the panda. She's not even in her May form, just like fully embracing her weirdness. And he has such a sweet conversation with her, talking about like what her mother went through when she transformed, and how he just, he really enjoyed watching the video because it was wholly representative of like who she truly is as a person. And I just found that to be very sweet. And that was definitely one of the moments where I got choked up.
Oh, 100%.
Pixar's so good at pulling at the heartstrings and that and making you cry. That's why I typically hold off on watching Pixar movies, but I was looking forward to this one. So, but yeah, that was absolutely a standout moment for me in the film. And I think it's even more impactful because we don't hear the dad speak a lot. The Lee household is absolutely a matriarchal household. So he is definitely a little more like reserved. But what I like about characters like that is that good writers know how to utilize those characters to accentuate really important moments and themes. And if a character doesn't say a lot, that when they do speak, you should listen to what they're saying, because they only speak if it's really important. And I just think this is an incredibly well-written scene in this movie.
100%. I'm so glad. This was literally the next moment I was going to bring up. Excellent. So I'm so glad that we passed it off to you. And just that moment itself, it makes a moment that's probably 15 or 20 seconds during the ritual when we see her separating from the panda and they look back at each other. I'm getting chills just talking about it. It's so sentimental and beautiful, and just this perfect representation of losing an aspect of yourself that's intrinsically a part of you, right? And even though it's only 15 seconds long, the build up to it just made it really, really sweet. And, obviously she decides to keep the panda in that moment. But yeah, that's incredible shout out for sure.
I love that choice too. There was a moment where I didn't know if the movie was actually going to allow her to keep the panda and lean into it. But right. I'm glad that that's the move that they decided to make. You were going to say?
Oh no, I'm just getting into a couple final favorite moments. Did you have anything else?
My second favorite moment is less sentimental than the first, and it relates to the fact, again, how anime this movie is. When the aunties are in the stadium with her grandma at the end of the movie, and they all kind of like crack their bracelets or earrings or brooches or whatever to like unleash the panda.
Yes.
That sequence is so incredibly like magical girl, which is Sailor Moon, basically. That's like the Sailor Moon genre. where you have all these like ridiculous transformations in anime. And I just really appreciated the love for the anime genre, I guess, in that moment. You can tell, like I said earlier, that Domi Shi has a genuine appreciation for that style of animation. And it comes through in particular in that third act of the film.
It just becomes a kaiju movie.
It's awesome. Yeah, and you have the kaiju elements as well. It's so much fun. It's so much fun.
No, totally agree. That moment was great. In the context of that scene when she's trying to keep the mother in the circle and she starts like dancing to make her uncomfortable, and the one friend's like, yeah, the one friend's like, destroy her with your big butt. I just died laughing. Oh, what a silly line. But yeah, I thought that was really, really funny. And then, ultimately the argument and the headbutt, my God, I was just really struck by that moment and how it kind of represents these moments that you feel like you'll never be forgiven by your parents for, and how she ultimately sees her mother as a child. This is the moment that broke me, when she had to tell her mother that she still loves her, and that, she was dealing with the same thing from her mother, from this experience and her growth as a kid. And my God, yeah, I don't know. I related to this too much, and I'm getting a little choked up now, even thinking about it, but it's ridiculously beautiful and so universal for Absolutely. Growing up and fighting with your parents at times, Yeah.
We all have to go on this journey, and being a teenager, is the relationship with teenagers and parents is always so tenuous and challenging, regardless of what type of relationship you have with them prior to hitting puberty. I will guarantee that most relationships become a little tumultuous during those few years, just because of all the changes and the hormones and everything. Everything is just kind of like amped up to 11, regardless of how important it really is. And your parents are kind of just there, having gone through it themselves. They're also there trying to be supportive, or some parents are trying to be supportive, being like, I remember my parents were always like, this isn't as big as you think it is, but in the moment it seems like it's so important, and it seems all these little things seem like they're your entire world, and it just creates these moments of tension with you and your parents. But one of the things I really love about that moment you're talking about with May seeing her mother as a child is like, one of the journeys that we have to go on as humans is realizing that our parents are human as well. Our parents are just trying their best as well, for the most part. Now, I'm not going to, I don't want to make like general umbrella statements or anything like that, but I would say that most people are just trying to do their best moving through the world. And you don't always realize that as a kid growing up. You think your parents are, you put them up on a pedestal. A lot of parents are God tier. They don't seem like they're human, but like these perfect things. But everybody's just trying to do their best. Right.
And looking back, you appreciate their patience with you even more, I think.
Absolutely.
Or something that definitely resonated with me watching this one. All right. If I talk about this anymore, I'm going to start crying again. Which I'm not ashamed of, because I was, as I was saying, sobbing, but not great for podcasting.
No, definitely
not always great.
Brian, is there anything else you want to add to the conversation before we wrap things up?
So I guess I'll just touch on the metaphor stuff and what I feel is a little bit of the bad reading of this. The second act is basically her starting to sell photos and merch of herself. Mm-hmm. And so it's like, if you're thinking about this literally, I get why you could feel uncomfortable with this. But in that same token, kids are not going to be thinking of the movie this literally. They're not going to be putting together the pieces of this. And the movie's clearly not saying that children should sell photos of themselves like this, right? It's clearly a bad faith reading, which
Brian, I want
seen
you to
people
know
talking about online.
That thought never crossed my mind.
This is the thing.
It's only now that you're pointing it out that I'm like, oh, you're right.
So I had and I'm not going to call them out, a former elementary school teacher of mine had shared a post from a friend of hers where they laid out a bunch of their thoughts about this and kind of were like talking about this. And it's like, you're clearly not the movie's clearly not trying to say anything like this. And if you're reading it this way, I think you're projecting something onto it that the movie's not trying to say. Right.
Agreed.
So it's really unfortunate that people are so uncomfortable with even just the metaphor of adolescence and puberty that they go into something like this. So yeah, I think ultimately the movie is about accepting the changes and being empowered by them rather than being ashamed of them. And I think something that really shows that there's a line that's one of the kids who's clearly a douche, but who they end up relating to later, who says something like flaunting your panda all over school or something. Mm-hmm. And this really made me think of people in middle school who it's like you hear someone has done something sexual and then they become almost like an outcast, a pariah. It's like, oh, that's the person who does this. They're a whore, they're a slut, and all of this shame that goes along with either bodily changes, how people dress, or just literally changes in people's body that happen over time at different ages, right? So it felt very true to growing up in the experience of that.
Absolutely.
There's also a line at the very end where May says, "My panda, my choice," which they're just beating us over the head with the metaphor at that point. This obviously has ties to abortion as well as like bodily autonomy generally. So certain spectrums of politically thinking people are going to push back against that sort of messaging. But again,
children are not going to pick up on that.
Are not going to. This is the kind of thing where all Pixar movies have lines that go over children's heads and that are clearly aiming to the adult audience in the course of this. So as I said, it's unfortunate. I think these are clear misreads of the movie and people actively trying to not enjoy something that is so universally relatable. And I think a really interesting way to introduce children to these ideas that happen to everyone.
I completely agree. And I don't want to end on a downer entirely about this movie, but I do want to bring something up. I know people that would prefer to take their children to go see the Batman, an almost R-rated movie, technically R-rated in the UK, in which in the opening sequence, a man is beaten to death with a carpet tucker, but they feel as though turning red is inappropriate for their children to watch. And look, I'm not a parent as of yet. It's not really my place to tell people how to parent their own children. Everybody's different, but I feel like there's something intrinsically wrong with our society if that is the case, where murder is seemingly more appropriate than talking about something that everyone goes through and everyone will have to experience. But that's just my personal opinion. Everyone can do and parent as they will. But personally, it's just a little disturbing to me that that's the case. I don't know how you feel about, how do you feel about that, Brian?
No, again, I think because of the age we're in the internet, I think the worst / most hot takes, for better and for worse, are the ones that get blown up and highlighted to the biggest degree because they generate attention either through rage or agreement, right? And it's just a product of the social media landscape that we're in now, where I think it is a smaller portion of people than it seems like to us online. But yeah, I mean, it's just ultimately unfortunate that, as we said, we talked about the politics a couple of weeks ago with the sort of legislation that is trying to hide the realities of growing up with children. And ultimately, we're going to be talking about The Witch in a few weeks. And
drastically different.
but relevant in the sense that repressing these sorts of things is never the best answer and ultimately leads to misunderstandings and other things, that I don't know how best to talk about it. We'll talk about The Witch explicitly then, but if you're not talking about these things with your children, eventually they're going to find out about them somehow. So it's like rather give them more information up front that you can control, right? I think that's the best way to handle these things personally.
I completely agree. And on that super up note,
this movie is so great. It is. I really did love it.
Me as well. It's a huge recommend. If you haven't seen Turning Red, I truly recommend giving it a chance. And if you're afraid about showing it to your children, as Brian mentioned at the top of the review, watch it yourself first and then decide whether or not you think it's appropriate. But that's going to do it for this episode of Pop-O-Holics. Thank you, loyal listeners and viewers, for sticking with us. Brian, where can people find you online?
You can find me on Twitter at True Pop-O-Holic.
And you can find me on Twitter at Chris Conkling, talking about all things nerdy, comic books, television, movies, video games, collectibles. If it's nerdy, I'm talking about it. And of course, you can find Pop-O-Holics on Twitter at Pop-O-Holics. We're on Instagram at Pop-O-Holicscast. We are on Facebook at Pop-O-Holics. If you're still using Facebook, you can email us at popholicscast@gmail.com if you have any feedback about what we've said, or if you want to recommend something for us to cover in the future, or guests you would like to see on the show. We're always happy to hear from you. And then, of course, we're on YouTube. If you're only listening to our audio version, you can see our faces on YouTube, youtube.com/Pop-O-Holics if you'd like. If you are on YouTube right now, again, please remember to like the video and subscribe to the channel, and click that bell icon so you never miss when we release a video. And with that, thank you again for joining us on